seconds for people to have a chance to register and check that they can hear me, they can see me, and we'll be on our way. I can't actually see how people are joining, so I'm going to just guess here that hopefully we have some people in the audience. Hello, good morning, and thank you to everybody who is spending their Wednesday morning with us for the webinar in which I'm joined by two industry experts. So I'm your host for today. I'm Marika, and with me this morning we have Tammy, CEO and founder of Revenue, and we have Carolyn, CEO of Futurist Strategist of My Travel Research. She is very much here and with us. However, her camera is not complying.
A virtual wave is happening, but as usual with technology, the promise doesn't necessarily live up to the delivery. And despite the rehearsal where it worked perfectly, of course, it's not working this morning.
So yeah, we'll just have to take all of your expertise in spades, Carolyn, and then the only moving images will be Tabby, myself, and the slides. So I think we'll have to just make do with that.
Well,
Yeah, in terms of the agenda for today, we will have the content broken down into three sections. So we'll chat through what we're seeing in terms of changes in demand of late, and how things are shaping up for future months for Australia. We'll talk through how the guest behaviors are changing, some of the changes in booking patterns that we're seeing as well. And finally, we will focus on the revenue aspect and some of the advice that we can share with you in terms of optimizing your performance throughout the rest of this year. So before we begin, just for a little drop of housekeeping, this webinar will actually be quite interactive. So if you haven't had your morning coffee, you better make a start, because there will be questions posted in the poll section on the right-hand side. And as we navigate through the three sections of the content this morning, we will pose the questions, give you a moment to start answering them, and then with my co-host today, I will chat through the results later on. So the first question has just been posted there in terms of risk factors and what do you see as the highest risks to your performance for this year. So please take the time to post your answers as we keep going. So in terms of the global patterns, if we start from the kind of macro level view, the outbound volumes of tourism have been rebounding quite steadily. We are seeing roughly on par with 2019 for last year, and that represents a triple the volume in comparison to 2021. The early prediction for 2025 was an expectation of a 5% lift across the globe, which also is kind of mirrored for Australia as a market in itself, with a strong return in particularly the bounce back in 22. Then between 2022 and 23, international arrivals have almost doubled. And then in the first quarter of this year, in terms of source markets, travelers from China remain as the top source market, followed by South Korea, and then New Zealand, the US, and the UK in terms of the arrivals have also increased. Now, looking at the forward window for the winter for us, summer for a few other markets. When we look at the hotel bookings between June and August this year, and bear in mind the snapshot for this has been taken on May 15th, so fairly recently. Globally, and the outlook is a little bit less positive. Australia is looking pretty strong. in terms of the increase in just on the 8.7% of our increase year on year, but in many of the markets that are kind of core international inbound for volume, we are seeing actually a bit of a decline. So before we go any further, I'd like to turn to my co-hosts in terms of your views on it and what's happening around the large markets there.
I think this is following very much on trends we saw about 4 years ago. Australia is seen as a nice, safe place to visit when there's unrest in other parts of the world. So we are going to get more people visiting Australia over the next 4 years until things settle back down politically around the world. And it's great because international travellers, they're not fixed on either midweek or weekend travel. Corporates are midweek, leisure or weekend. They're here for 2 or 3 weeks and they travel every day. So the international market going up is always good because it eases out those peaks and troughs for hotels. What do you think, Carolyn?
I think I probably wouldn't be able to add too much to that, Tammy, except to say I think that political uncertainty is really playing in Australia's favour, and indeed since the pandemic. I mean, Tourism Australia have been on record as saying all the things that have historically worked against us, like time, distance and cost, have actually started at the pandemic to say, look, we're a long way from anywhere else. We're a very stable country. I think we've just got our election out of the way very quickly. But I think if you look at Europe, there is still a lot of political uncertainty. We've seen a lot of elections there. We've just had the elections in Poland. We've had the elections in Romania. And I think it's also about market mix. And this is why it's important to have a diverse market mix, because we know that outbound booking, whilst inbound bookings to the US are down, outbound bookings from the US are also a little down as people are feeling a little uncertain, a little bit unsure whether Americans are a little bit unsure whether they'll be welcome. And that's a much bigger share of European markets, long haul inbound, than elsewhere. So I think you put those things together and a degree of uncertainty. I mean, uncertainty is the killer for travel always. And it's about giving people certainty, I think, is the issue.
Well, thank you for that. When we focus on Australia actually a little bit more closely, we are definitely seeing, what you both highlighted here, that the volume of bookings overall for the winter this year are looking pretty strong year on year. And bear in mind, again, the snapshot was taken mid-May, so it's fairly recent. But it is looking pretty strong actually in markets all around Australia. When we break that down into the volumes per capital cities, the sharpest uptick is in Adelaide, that's almost 24%. And then Sydney and Hobart are quite a close follow. Now, when we look at the momentum overall and pace year on year throughout winter, to your point, Caroline, about some of the changes driven by the geopolitical factors, we are seeing a slight bit of a slowdown for August in the booking window for winter overall, to what we did see in terms of the momentum between April to mid-May. And from average rate point, that is a pretty steady increase for the country as a whole of 2.5%. However, the fastest growth we are seeing in Perth, and most capital cities are showing positive results year on year, just with one small exception of Darwin. And so with that, my next question to both of you is around the current demand for the markets that you want to dive into a little bit deeper, and what is your crystal ball predictions for the rest of 2025?
Crystal balls always make me nervous, I have to say, because it's very easy. This will live on the internet forever and prove us wrong. I think one of the things I noticed, and I perhaps didn't touch on in the previous question, and I noticed this is something that people have touched on in the polls, is that, consumer uncertainty. I mean, we're getting better. The couple of interest rates will have turned the corner, which I think will have helped, but that global economic insecurity is there. But one thing that I've seen, I've been tracking this. I'm going to show my age. Unfortunately, you can't see me on camera at this point. But I've been tracking this pretty much since the early 90s in terms of economic and political crises. And one thing that we've seen is in each one of those, people have hung on to travel as something that's important in their lives. And it's moved from something we saw as being a privilege or a luxury to being very central to who we are as humans. So what we tend to see is that people are changing. They're determined to keep travel. And one of the ways they do that is a phenomenon that we labeled in an earlier crisis of back in around the global financial crisis, is the idea of trading up and trading down. So keep traveling, but what can I save money on? And I think that that's one of the things that's driving that out of season travel as well. So we're seeing globally around the world, people are driving out of season travel as one way of saving money, getting more value for their money. Look, I think it's what we're probably going to see as people work through, hopeful signs like interest rate rises coming through domestically, setting against the economic. I think people are going to be hunting for the deal. So actually, there's a lot we tend to do when we do predictions, like assuming the future is fixed. Every single one of us, every single day is creating the future. So being nimble and being agile, if we get that right, I predict we will do well riding on those trends that we talked about earlier. But I'm going to hand over to Tammy to see if there's anything she wants to kind of add to that.
I would say we're seeing it's this mix. And even having just traveled overseas myself, talking to people, there's a real mix in, they will have some nights in 3-star, but some nights in 5-star. So when they're planning their travel, they will mix it up and put together the cost saving experiences. So there'll be I'll do this free event, or I'll stay in this cheaper hotel, and then they go somewhere else and they're like, this is the one that I want to make really memorable. And that's the one where they splurge. So across the whole hotel, the whole holiday, they may spend the same amount of money. It's just where they're choosing to spend it and what they choose to splurge on and where they choose to save.
So trying to draw the most possible value. The good thing in it for hoteliers, I suppose, is that you have a higher chance of getting the love spread across various segments of the industry as well. And actually, when we look at the result of the poll for the first question, 59% of our audience have marked that it is the reduced customer spending driven by inflation that they see as the highest risk factor for their accommodation. Does that surprise you, either of you, that this is the most popular answer?
I think for me, it's those that have money, and they continue to have money, and they probably have more money because they've got it in savings. Those without, this is a real worry. Inflation and things like that is a real worry. My question, and where I'd love to see statistics broken down further, would be the age of each of the travelers as we break it down by age, because in my conversations with people who are baby boomers, they're starting to tell me things like, I am traveling slower. I have to travel slower. My body's slowing down. They're facing the reality, and they're booking things like Airbnb because they can spend a few days in an area. They're retired now. They don't have to, tick off the 5 bucket list items in a week. They can travel a lot slower. Whereas other people I talk to are taking more frequent holidays, but for shorter time. So younger generations, it's more frequent, weekends away, trips here, trips there. And it sounds like they're always on holiday, but they're just for shorter time.
I think that's a great point. And I think that's the thing. We always tend to look at this as macro level, and often the devil is in the detail of that. So again, it comes back to that market mix issue, doesn't it? Where you're talking about that. I have to say it doesn't surprise me, because actually, if you look at the other three things that we talked about in the poll, well, two of the other three, geopolitical events and rising labor costs, that all feeds into that inflation. So consumers are at the kind of back end of that. And I think that is there. But it's interesting, because that's the thing, to your point, Tammy, every time interest rates went up over the past few years, baby boomers had more, who,
Yeah.
given the high levels of intergenerational inequality we have, they actually had more money to spend.
Yes.
And that's where we're seeing those differences. And to pick up on your earlier point around people where to splurge and where to save, and linking that back to your point, Marika, about because we have a good spread of hotels, it's really about thinking where your point of advantage is on that. Because realistically, if you are that budget hotel, one of the things we've seen in research, some research done by the Growth Distillery, is people choosing to do things like, bring a takeaway in or prepare meals in their room. So if you're a motel with a little kitchenette, targeting your market by saying, look, here's a great way you can come and save money. Further up the chain, it really is about making it clear why you're the bit that they should splurge on.
To jump in there, we've noticed that we're having to do a lot of work with hotels to really highlight their unique selling points, to say this is not something you want to hide away. You have a microwave, you have a kitchenette or a kitchen, tell people about it, really sell it. Because as soon as we start highlighting the extra things in the rooms, that's where the business changes. So traditionally hotels are like, oh, I've got a standard room and an executive room. By changing the names to a queen room with kitchenette, people can really see what they're going to get for their money. And it may be slightly more than the hotel down the road, but they're like, as you say, Carolyn, I can cook my dinner, or I can make my breakfast. I can have a snack, and then they can splurge on a really nice dinner.
So yeah, tailoring the descriptions to your to the audience that you're trying to attract, and actually this is exactly what we want to focus on in the part number 2 of the 2 out of 3 of today's content, because we will now look at a little bit more as to those consumer spending patterns and how has that been evolving. What does our data tell us for travelers in Australia, whether they are domestic or international. Now, just before we move into some of the stats that I have prepared for you here, the second question will be posted in the polls. So this is around the shifts in traveler behaviors, and what do you believe that is required of you as the most urgent thing to attend to for your property. So please head into the poll section now to start submitting your answers there. And we'll keep going. So in terms of the booking patterns versus 2024, this is actually still quite steady for us in Australia. Here we are a highly domestic market, and the kind of, it keeps in around 80 to 20% ratio domestic to international. But interestingly, over the last few months, April was a call out, I expect driven by the dates in the school holidays, where domestic had gone up to 87% in that month alone. Now, when we look at again on country level and inbound travelers from overseas, the interesting thing that stands out is that the British travelers are the ones with the fastest expenditure growth. So doesn't necessarily mean that they are spending the most while they're here. However, their likelihood to spend has been increasing the fastest at almost 20%. And when we look at the booking window and how far in advance people are booking, yes, sure, Carolyn pointed out quite rightly so earlier in the day that we are quite far away from everything, so people internationally will tend to book further in advance, but we're seeing something similar actually for domestic travelers too, where the booking window for winter does continue to lengthen, and year on year it has gone up by further 8 days. And in terms of the average length of stay, that has increased ever so slightly year on year as well. So with that, the question for Tammy and Carolyn from me is now in terms of the changes that you've observed, and what would be your advice to hoteliers in terms of adapting to those expectations?
Do you want to go first, Carolyn?
I'm very happy to do so, Tammy, but I was just about to be equally polite the other way. I think what I see is, and I talk about this in the sense of some things are unchanging and other things changing very fast. So you'll hear a lot of talk about people, and I notice this is one of the questions in the poll, traveling for experiences, quote, these days. In my experience, these days have existed for about 5,000 years. We used to call them pilgrimages, and actually you could argue that the first travelers were the people who walked out of Africa and settled the rest of the world. We've always looked around the corner, so it's a deep human need. But what we've seen as we've responded to that need is a diversification of experience, so that there are lots of different ways to make things a lot more unique for people. Personalization. I mean, who would have known 10 years ago we would have been talking about men's wellness packages? That used to mean, a bar crawl or somewhere and a game of golf. And that's still there and that's still growing. But, we're seeing men book spa packages. We're seeing them do mental health things slightly differently, but that recognition, responding to a crisis there. We're seeing, solo travel, particularly solo female travel among baby boomers, just soaring. So I think, to me, it's really the thing about it, the significant change is looking at people in more disaggregated ways and thinking about that. And that's where that opportunity to really have that value proposition coming through is there. I do think probably the most significant one at a time of geopolitical uncertainty, and bearing in mind that 80% of money that's spent in travel in Australia is domestic, is people choosing to stay at home, driven by uncertainty, but also driven by exchange rates. And the other side of that positively is, because we're suddenly a very good value destination internationally, we do see that comes up. So some of that spending more will actually not look like spending more to the person in their own currency. I've seen this historically when Australia's exchange rate went the other way and went up. We were talking about reduced expenditure, but if you actually put it back into people's origin cultures, it wasn't. So I do think that comes through. Your UK numbers, I had to think about this, and particularly what's happening in Adelaide. And I'm just going to say the words. I know we'll discuss this later in the presentation. The British and Irish Lions, yay, are coming back for the first time in over a decade. And they're coming and doing their first trip to Adelaide in over a century. So that creation of an experience there that you couldn't have had any time in the 100 years, this idea of ephemeral tourism, not only I can only do it in this place, but I can only do it now. That will, I think, have played a role in surging for that. And again, those visitors are coming. They might only stay 3 days in Adelaide around a game, but they'll probably do a few things while they're there. And then moving around. So you will see those. So I think that's thinking about those kind of special interests, those niches, and being a lot more conscious in who your customers are, to me, is an important point. Tammy, over to you.
I would say, picking up on what you're saying, it's customers are feeling much more confident to show how they want to travel. So we've always had these people want to travel for, say, the Lions tour, and they're exhibiting this, and they've been very overt in how they want to travel. I want to travel like this. I want to travel as a solo female traveler. I want to travel for my passion, which is rugby union. Or even if it's just something like playing bridge or doing crochet workshops and things like that, people are traveling because that's what they're passionate about. And then we as hotels need to respond to it, and identify that these things are happening in our area, and show people how to spend an extra night there or an extra 2 nights in our area. So if we just go, okay, great, we're going to be really busy in Adelaide for the Lions tour on that date, or the Grand Prix on that date, we're missing that additional spend. We've got to tell people this is how you can spend an extra 2 days, 3 days, 4 days. And they don't want to know the bucket list things. They know that if they go to Sydney, there's the Opera House. They want to know what else they can do in Sydney. What's unique? What's different? Is it an art class next door? Is it that interesting dining experience? Is it that tour or something that only the locals know about, that then they can share on social media and go, wow, look at me, I did this. It's something different to what everyone else did when they were in Sydney. So our responsibility as hoteliers is to talk to our guests. And this probably comes back to personalizing the stay. It's not using AI. It's not doing all of those things. It's actually talking to our customers and being prepared to say, oh my gosh, I love such and such a Spanish food. If you go down the block, turn left, turn right, there's the most amazing little Spanish restaurant there. You probably won't find it in a guidebook, but I go there all the time, and we're personalizing it. We're talking to our customers. That's what they want. They want to feel like a local.
And perhaps it's also, perhaps it's also about, in that case, sharing some of those insights with the marketing teams, right? Like the revenue strategy and high demand dates actually informing your marketing strategy to bring that a bit closer to the customer perspective.
Yeah.
Most definitely. I think that's something we tend to be very siloed in hotels, don't we, Marika? And actually, the best ideas come when we share across. And I think the other thing, and I know, Tammy, you've talked a lot about this in the past, is we need to start thinking of hotels in very functional ways, however basic they are. Just as much as any other thing, like at the destination or whatever, you are really custodians of place and of its stories. And I think if you think about yourself in that way and you share your stories and your knowledge and your experience at every level, that's going to do that. And if always you're thinking about what those stories are that the marketing team could be telling about, adding an extra day, that the reception team can be telling about that little restaurant. If you're always really passionate about where you are, then that is going to be, that is such a powerful thing. So that effective response to all of these things is, how can you, and also, how can you link it back to what you've got to sell and offer? I noticed somebody had made a comment about ancillary spend and share of guest wallet. What are you doing to upsell people? And this is where that revenue management marketing upsell thing is so important. The 48 hours before people come to you, they're super excited. They're a little bit nervous. Can you upsell them something in that period with a quick email? While we're here, did you think about this? Or dealing with one of my bête noirs, the 10 o'clock bloody checkout. Can you offer people something to say, well, would you upgrade to, stay till later in the afternoon if you're not going to need to clean the room that day? So all of those things, that upsell stage just before you get there and when you've got people in front of you is there. I mean, I'm saying I think you can have AI help you in the background, but no one's flown 24 hours from the UK to do something they could have done on their computer at home. They're looking at you as local knowledge, right?
It's really interesting that we've actually worked with a few hotels recently that went totally contactless in 2022, 23. and they're all slowly easing back on how contactless they are and reintroducing team members. So they're not putting back in the traditional reception desks of 7 till 3, 3 till 11, 11 till 7. Not that. They're creating a floating position, a person that floats around the hotel and is there to talk. So it's more like a concierge position, because they can still do the contactless check-in. They can still get their PIN code and go into the room. But this is putting a person around the reception area for the guests to talk to say, where should I go for dinner? Where should I go? I've got a couple of hours in between meetings and I want to go for a run. Where's a good place? So it's that person offering the local perspective, and they're all easing this contactless back, bringing that personal touch back in.
Yeah, so don't make hospitality a hospital in terms of mechanical interactions.
Oh, I like that.
That's a lovely way of putting it, Marika.
Well, I do love what you both said about kind of trying to enhance that value, keeping the teams talking together, and actually looking for ways to showcase how to extend the stay, because that's actually the most popular answer in the poll to the second question. So 66% of our respondents have selected that shorter booking lead times and stay lengths is actually what concerns them the most. After we wrap up today, we'll also share a bit of an action plan kind of handout to help everybody who joined in today put some principles into practice. But moving on to the kind of final part of today's session, so focusing actually on a little bit of advice from revenue performance. We will now post the third question in the poll for our audience to select from the multiple choice there. Looking ahead, which revenue optimization strategy you believe would hold the most potential for your property between June and December this year? So please start posting your answers in there, and we'll keep going. So we'll start off with a little bit of a look at events. Carolyn, you mentioned the Lions Tour, excitingly for sure, and there's nothing new about our fascination with events overall. It's a segment that is projected to nearly double in the next 6 years. So there's definitely still a high level of appetite to be filling in those stadiums and whatnot. But if any of you joining us this morning want to have a closer look at some of the research that we've done on changing behaviors across the globe, if you just scan this QR code here, you'll be able to actually have a little read on what we have discovered from surveying just over 12,000 respondents. So it's a good kind of data sample to guide you through some of the trends there. 100% events, there's no kind of secret there that it's something that drives changes in demand, and it is typically the larger capital cities that are capitalizing on it because of the market size and the volume of rooms. But one thing that I'd want to call out that's quite interesting, closer to home for us, is actually the White Lotus effect. So I don't know how familiar you are with the show, but it was something that had actually done wonders for Tourism Thailand. And over the Songkran dates, Koh Samui in particular saw a spike of almost 40% in terms of their booking volumes. Now, when we look for something a little bit closer to home, even if you're not a fan of the White Lotus, but you are a big enthusiast of cricket, it's definitely something that is now driving significant changes in demand in the 5 cities where we will see the matches on. So
Just jump in there, Marika.
Yeah.
I deal with a lot of hotels, motels, and regional areas, so these big events don't make it to them. But what we see in regional areas is the events that it could be a basketball competition, it could be a swimming competition, it could be even Rockhampton has a meat festival every couple of years. There's smaller events that the local tourism associations and the councils are putting on that attract people in, and they do just as much for revenue in regional areas as those big spikes we saw on the last screen. The other one in regional areas that you need to watch for is where 2 or 3 events come together. So quite often we might look at a date and go, man, it's not very exciting. Oh, why are we spiking? And then it's not till we dig deeper that we realize there's actually a basketball and a swimming competition on the same dates. So those smaller areas, don't despair. Taylor Swift always goes to the big cities, but there's lots of exciting things happening.
Yeah, and of course the number of rooms in the market is a lot more constrained. So you know, you can fill up and get that increase pretty fast as well. It's definitely, you know, having a bit of a demand calendar for events coming is something that helps a great deal, because, you know, for sizes of the cricket games in between Perth, Brisbane, Adelaide, Melbourne, Sydney, which is where the matches are coming this year, you know, it would be very hard not to notice the increase in demand there because of its size. But for the smaller ones, 100%, it also then comes down to keeping your travelers aware of what there is to see and what is coming up, as well as, you know, keeping the finger on the pulse there in terms of the price monitoring. Yeah,
you can work with your local tourism association and your council to get them putting on events. The best events are the ones that happen later in the day, because then it's harder for people to travel back home. Like, think if there's an event, you know, at midday, people can travel in the morning and then travel back home in the evening. Whereas if it's more like 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, or even think of all those towns doing winter light packages and things like that, it's hard for people to travel straight back home afterwards.
And I think it's good also I was actually going to say exactly the same thing, Tammy, that working with your local tourism and having a think about events that you might have ideas for. I mean, it's an event center rather than a hotel. But the Park's Elvis Festival actually began by an event center called Gracelands, who had a big Elvis fanatic, and they came up with the idea and took it to the local council. And now, I mean, this is something, 3 trainloads of Elvises go out in January, which, believe me, is not a time of year necessarily Parks is the most comfortable place to be. It's much more a shoulder and winter destination to me. But I think the other thing that nicely brings out to your example, Tammy, is thinking about it opportunistically, because when Parks gets full, we worked many years ago with Dubbo Council, who were laying on packages with their local hoteliers and local coach companies, because Parks was sold out, and it was sold out for months. So they went out and say, well, look, we can get you there. So you don't have to worry about driving those roads. Book a package with us. We'll put you up for the night. We'll get you up there, you know, trying to pick up some incremental revenue around food on top of that. So I think, and one of the things I would say is that there's a difference. Stu Spears, who's one of the best thinkers on event strategy that I know, he makes a difference between those, what he calls events you rent, like the basketball, and they're really important. They're really great revenue earners, but you don't own them. Creating and working on and partnering on events that you own, I think, can be a really powerful way to do it. And there are so many great examples of that. You know, similarly, Tamworth Country Music Festival. I can't remember what the Light Festival in Sovereign Hill is. Tammy, you're based in Victoria.
First 2 weeks of July. So they actually, the Sovereign Hill and the Ballarat Council identified that winter was one of their worst times a year. Anyone who knows the weather in Ballarat will understand why people don't want to go there in winter. So they added a bit of fake snow and some lights, and suddenly the town fills. It's an amazing event, brings so many people in.
Yeah, and working together to put those I'm a big fan of packages and packaging up things, and you've got some great stuff on the SiteMinder site about this. I was having a look around for some examples, and they were beautifully optimized for SEO, and it was there. I mean, the examples are from overseas, but I think that's where I sort of see that, and working with your local destination, your management net organization or local tourism organization around creating events. I think Dalesford Macedon down in Victoria is a really great example of, they've actually promoted that come and be warm and cozy. It's cold outside, come and be warm and cozy in heritage properties with big fires. Really wonderful emotive advertising that they're putting together to build that demand for that. I'm sitting here going, sitting in a nice pub in regional Victoria next to a roaring fire with the pub lunch sounds pretty damn good to me right now.
Yeah,
Even though
I
it's
wouldn't
sunny in
be
Sydney.
saying no to that right this moment, that's for sure. And actually on the local campaigns, and I think we touched on that when we caught up the first time, was actually the tourism Tassie campaign with the Come Down for Air, right? Like I actually was a big fan of that, because it did make me want to put a very thick woolly jacket and visit Tassie, and I've never been there yet, so it's definitely on my list now.
Well, for a lot of Australians who live in the top half of Australia, being cold and winter is a novel experience. I know for us down in the southern parts of Australia, it's not, but you think someone who lives in Cairns or Darwin or even top half of Australia, they come down and sit by an open fire and, hot toddy and all that sort of thing. It's novel, it's different. They've only seen it on TV.
And markets like, the Gulf GCC markets like Dubai, Qatar, all of those markets, they love cold, clear days. They even historically like rain. I hate to say this, because I remember interviewing some of them on a project, and they were like, "Why you always talk to us about sunny Sydney? We have 310 days of sunshine a year. We're loving the rain. We're loving seeing the greenery that comes with rain." So, that's again where thinking creatively about what you've actually got. And
Yes, come over for the poor weather.
come over for because we travel to experience difference, right?
Yes.
So, come and experience beautiful, cold, clear winter days.
Well, you think it's Orange, when it snows out in Orange, the hotels fill because people come out of Sydney to drive to see the snow. They go to see it. They've never seen it before. On the other hand as well, Ayers Rock, I worked out there many years ago, and some of the most amazing experiences I had at Ayers Rock was when it rained. Because we've all seen the photo, we've all seen the TV shows about sunrise, sunset on Ayers Rock. But when it rains, it turns into waterfalls and it turns purple, and it's a very different experience. So the concept of rain and the difference it brings to your holiday and your holiday photos can be amazing and something to sell.
I was actually there when it rained. Tammy saw a rainbow over it, and everybody I've shown that picture. I said you could go there every day for 10,000 days and not see that, and we were there. Just don't do that for Germans, because that they've come for the heat. They are our saviors on that sort of stuff. So that they've come to be hot, because Germany isn't like that. They love our desert areas. For them, Germany, Australia is like Africa. That big sweeping plains, that hot weather, that open skies. So get them coming in your hot seasons. If you're somewhere where your low season is your hot season, Germans, a little bit the French, but those Central Europeans are your friends.
Just to move to our next section, actually, our discussion was very, very timely, because this was the spot for the next question for you ladies. Is there anything in particular that you'd want to recommend that we haven't touched on yet in terms of what is working very well for the hoteliers in Australia? What is kind of driving the greatest success?
I would say we're seeing success, but it's divided across the style of property. So Our 5-star properties, which have leisure destinations, spas, that sort of really romantic breaks, we've introduced 2 or 3 night packages, like packages designed to extend their stay, and they give the person the itinerary, the agenda of what they're going to do throughout their stay. We're giving them the ideas that they don't have to think it up. So we've packaged it up with spa treatments, with lunches, picnics, all those sorts of things, put it together and then said here, and they're buying it. Whereas your 3-star properties, that's not working as well. Yes, we still might use packages for SEO and for marketing reasons, but we're finding it's more the price that drives in people in the 3 and 4-star properties. So everything is different according to which style of property it is.
Carolyn, how about from your perspective?
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, Tammy, you touched on it, and I did express my passion for packages. I think if you're a 3 and 4-star property, it's actually about partnership marketing packages, which is, you know, recognizing what your role is, trying to increase at the margins, but creating experiences are like, for those people who are like, well, that's not in this trading up, trading down, I'm just coming to stay in the room. And then we can package it up for you to do, you know, can we get you out to do, you know, if you're staying in a more basic motel in Mudgee, can we package up for you to do a wine tour? Can we package up for you to do a chocolate tour? Those kinds of things. So I think that's where I see partnerships coming through. I mean,
partnerships also work really, really well for SEO, for newsletters, for social media. So when we talk to hoteliers about creating partnerships, it's not just about selling the package. It's all the other marketing opportunities that come with it. So we have to, and then when we analyze the success of anything, we can't just look at the numbers on how many packages we sold. It's what else did we get? Did we get more clicks on the website? Did we get more clicks on the newsletter? Have we got more followers on the social media? And did we get more bookings on the room only package?
I think a couple of other things that I've really seen that work successfully over the years is what I'd call local friends and family. So there's a perception in the hotel industry that people who are doing VFR, visiting friends and relatives, don't stay in paid accommodation. And it's true that many of them don't. And it's also true often they will do things like Airbnbs, etc. But I think it's very, very, you know, around 25 to 40% at any time of VFR visitors are staying in hotels. And so working, and it's often very much more easy to put out local marketing. You know, your local newspaper will be very happy to have an article about what you're doing. And the same with building that connection with locals. So if you have a nice restaurant in your property that's quiet on certain days, are you doing local packages for people to come in and pop in and do something local? Do you have something where you're, and I've seen it's more of a kind of mid to upmarket property and in the central west of New South Wales, but they have a whole bunch of things that they do for locals. They do cocktail functions, they do things that bring people in. And again, your property may not have that, but what is it you've got? The other thing I think is, you know, and Tammy, I know I've heard you talk about this a lot, so feel free to interrupt me. That looking outwards, don't be so in yourself.
Yes.
Paying attention.
Like hotels, I find when you go to regional towns, someone from an outsider has come in and bought that motel. And then they run the motel and they get so incredibly busy running the motel that they've forgotten the human side of going to the pub and network, making friends, going to the tourism association, going to the local cafe and making friends and becoming a part of the community. Because otherwise that motel just becomes something that we all just drive past. Locals just drive past on a daily basis and go, that's for tourists, it's not for me. And they don't think about it. But this outsider bought it, the outsider is running it. And I say outsider in a nice way because little towns, you're an outsider until you've lived there for 50 years. But you've got to become a part of the community. So people then go, oh, well, Uncle Bob's coming to visit me this weekend. Now I'm going to book them, or I'm going to tell them to book that hotel because I speak to that person at the pub. They're part of the CFA. They're part of I see them at the networking events, and I've been to their hotel for a paint and sip. That hotel's become a part of their life.
Yeah, I think it's really powerful, Tammy. I think the other thing, we've talked a lot about big data here and AI and forward booking data, but there's a lot of human, what the SPI community calls humint, so human intelligence, that your frontline staff are hearing and having conversations with your guests, your visitors. And I would say that goes all the way down to the cleaners. So what are they seeing? What are their patterns? And I was thinking this came to me because this was how I once created a package in a job that I had, a product in a job that I had, is what do you find you're saying no to a lot?
Yeah.
What
are you trying to sort out at the last minute? I introduced a package at one hotel actually in Nottingham, and it was, we had rooms with 4-poster beds. So we had become the default place to stay before you went on honeymoon. So on that wedding night, and then before you flew out the next day for your honeymoon. And the reception team were telling me that the customers, the bride and groom, were arriving at midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, starving, hungry. And for anyone that's been through a wedding day, they all know and remember they don't always get time to eat. And they get to the hotel room starving, hungry, and the reception team are like, they're asking us for food. So we worked with the chef to create a package and it was the most simplest thing. We left a sandwich platter in the room. And what chef can't create a sandwich platter out of something? And it would be in the room with some soft drinks. We didn't do alcohol, just some soft drinks, some bottle of water, and a sandwich platter. And that package sold itself. We didn't have to do anything with it. There was nothing romantic about it. There was no flowers. There was none of that stuff because they were getting on a plane the next day. And that was just reception telling me in a bit of a moan session, that's what was happening. And we created something to resolve the problem.
Finding and eliminating friction that's where you get your incremental innovation from. And, the example I always use is wheels on suitcases. It's not a huge difference, but the net sum of human traveling happiness by having wheels on suitcases has done more than a great many other much more dramatic things. So those small changes that really are aha moments. And I can imagine your guys in your Nottingham hotel where they're saying, and they had these sandwiches. When you're having your bragathon about your wedding versus anyone else's wedding, that really is that moment where you look like the smartest bride in the room. So great for bridezillas.
Well, interestingly, according to our audience, the targeted packages, which both of you are very passionate about, have only gotten 20% of the votes. So, in terms of the power of the strategy changes, 41% of responses are all about dynamic pricing, and the targeted packages are actually the third choice in popularity. So quite interesting to see that in comparison. But if we're to sum it up into 5 kind of bits of advice overall, I think we have collectively covered all of these now in terms of focusing on how the demand is shaping up for the events that are around you. What pattern changes can you see as early as possible to capitalize on it as early as possible, if it is the Elvis Festival, for example. What can you do in terms of increasing the engagement with the guests already on your already having your accommodation in their itinerary? What can you do to really closely understand the pricing within the market that affects the demand patterns for you, and also be optimized for your points of sale? So in terms of just our final question for both of you ladies, is there any other words of advice that you can share in terms of overall profitability? You know, there's a lot that accommodation providers can be doing. Not a lot of that is cost free. So what would be your words of advice in terms of focusing on the profit line overall?
I would say from my perspective and the clients I work with, so predominantly regional motels, get back to basics, review your room types, review your rate plans, review the pricing increments between your room types. There's often a facility there to make extra money. Make sure your room type descriptions are not a list of amenities in the room, but sell the rooms. Make sure your room type names sell the rooms, so you don't have the executive's deluxe suite, which means nothing, but you have the queen room with kitchenette. You're telling people what you've got, and really highlight what's great about your room, your photos, your descriptions, your amenities. Tick all those annoying buttons on booking.com and get your distribution sorted out, because there's often a lot of extra money can be made around there.
That all great points, Tammy. I mean, I think a couple of things. I might pick up on this dynamic pricing, because I'm looking at that question 3. I'm guessing there may have been a lot of people going all of the above, because they're all things you have to do. I think with dynamic pricing, I'm actually a fan of the concept of dynamic pricing, but I think it requires careful handling with the consumer. And you look at what's happening in the event ticketing space around dynamic pricing, and you can see it brings in a lot of complex questions about the consumer needs to see that it makes sense why you're doing it. So they get, if there's a lot of demand, that prices are higher, but not that much. I mean, Tammy, I'm sure like me, you've heard dozens of consumers complain about why it's all families. It's always more expensive to travel in school holidays. And you go, well, yeah, that's what demand management looks like, right? But I think it's always about, taking the consumer on the journey of why that is and what you're doing, and giving them options. So yeah, we're pricing at a premium point right now, but if you could come a day earlier or a day later,
We'll stay longer.
yeah, or stay longer, share the benefits with them in that way. And I think the other thing that I feel is, and this is not just hotels, this is all of us in every endeavor in our life, is we need to get more comfortable with failure and with experimentation. So don't be afraid to try things, work out what you, in mountaineering terms, would talk about where's your turnaround point. So where do you say this is the sign it's not working? But if it doesn't work, don't see it as a failure, see it as that learning opportunity, which is much easier for somebody like me to say than for any of us to feel. But I think that if you look at the people who really make big money in life, they were not afraid of failure, and they failed many times before they hit the big time.
And
So
if you fail, then just make sure that you fail fast. You learn fast and you fail fast. Yeah.
Perfectly put, Marika. I think that's what I would say is, don't be afraid to try things. I mean, everyone's come on here because they're open to learning and new ideas. And you obviously think it through. One piece of advice to avoid failure that I often use with my clients is the idea of a pre-mortem, which I stole blatantly from McKinsey's, which is when you're thinking about an idea, get a group of people in the room, let the most junior people speak first so you don't get any sunflower effect, and ask them to imagine that you've done this and it's gone wrong, and you've been invited to work out where it's gone wrong. And it's a fabulous way to reduce your risk of failure, because what you're actually do is allow people to surface all the doubts that they have, which mean you can either bin it because it's like, this really isn't going to work, or you can start to look at how you address the things that are going to make it go wrong. And there's a very famous example of this when Starbucks decided they wanted to do a big DEI conversations over coffee. And I'm damn sure, and it was a disaster. And I'm damn sure there was someone in the room when that was happening going, oh, I'm not really sure. I think people have just come in to get a cup of coffee. They don't really want to be having conversations about race over their first coffee of the morning. And I think with a bit of tweaking, there was actually a really interesting idea about how you use conversations there. But because no one felt they could voice their doubts about this cool idea, I've got my hands in exclamation marks there, but you can't see it. I think, stress test it, bring diverse voices into the room, but don't be afraid to try things.
I actually really love what you're saying there, Carolyn, and thinking about it too. Bringing a diverse set of people into the conversation. I think also an important point to make there is don't forget of their cultural backgrounds, because you'll very likely have a diverse workforce, right? Many of people employed by you and in your team might have not been born here. English might not be their first language. So also don't forget what might be confronting for them and their own upbringing. We're getting a little bit maybe off topic here, but yeah, that's just a thought that just brought to my mind.
It's a very important topic, with 50% of the population either first or second generation migrants. Who is an Australian, I think, is a very big question in marketing. So I actually think it's very on topic. We've got to it indirectly, Marika, but I think it's a very on topic point, is thinking about who you represent in your marketing. Modern families, pets are people too. You talked about that with us in the past, Tammy, the importance of pet-friendly packages.
Pet-friendly accommodation is huge right now. People are looking for places to go away and take the pet. Because finding a reliable pet sitter is just about impossible.
Yeah,
we are at time here, ladies. Sorry, I just I want to make a moment now, and I could talk to you for hours, but I want to make a moment now for questions from our audience before they have to get back to their busy days. If there are any questions from our audience here, if you'd like to either post it in the chat and we can respond in the chat directly, or actually, do we have a way for audience to ask a question out loud? No? Okay, sorry. My technical assistant to the side is telling me no. So please post your questions in the chat if you have any, and I can read it out and then we can respond. Otherwise, if there are no questions, we've satisfied your thirst for knowledge here, to the max. We will share content afterwards, and we will also share a bit of consolidated advice for you to revert back on. You're actually able to download the action plan already in the handout section.
It's going like hotcakes looking at the numbers, Marika.
Yep, it is getting quite popular, but don't worry, if you run out of time to do it now, we can supply it afterwards as well. Just looking at the chat box here again, no other questions. All right, so perhaps everybody has had their questions satisfied, and we will share the recording of the webinar afterwards. Anyway, so thank you very much for joining us, and thank you very much, Tammy and Carolyn. It's been a great chat, and let's do this again sometime.
Thank you.
That would be great.
Thank you so much. Cheers.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.